Can you really imagine that most families in the areas that we serve cannot afford basic milk to feed their children, or that a pregnant woman walks 6 to 7 kilometers to reach one of our clinics alone in night to deliver? It is unthinkable for someone who lives in a city.
The NGOs or CSO, civil society institutions, our basic purpose of existence is to reach the unreached or reach the last mile. And we need to understand who are these people who are in the last mile. These are basically people, not only scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, but also what I told about single women households, people with no adult members in the disability household, but also the workers.
For us, we work on prisoner rights. And if you see the prisoner demography, these are people who are historically marginalized, and there is a systemic bias that works against certain communities in our society. And then once people from certain margins, I mean, when they enter prison, then there is no way of going back into the society, because then prison itself is a taboo, and you're like making an additional discrimination factor. Obviously, for an inclusive society, we definitely have to include prisoners in the we can't think of social change without including prisoners in it, or we can't think of an inclusive society without including prisoners in it.
They don't have any agency of themselves. As a consequence, they don't demand. And these people often are invisible, or we can say invisibilized. The systems make them invisible. They are often stigmatized because they don't have opportunities.
Being inclusive is, when you hear statements like, oh, but we can't reach everybody. Oh, but sometimes that's collateral damage of something that's for the larger good. Oh, but, sometimes people don't want to change. So it's really those statements that are telling you exactly where you need to be and who you need to engage with.
But to take it a step further and to ensure that inclusivity permeates all processes, ranging from recruitment to retention to the development of a professional and also members that we are engaging from the community, people who might come from invisible marginalizations are also included in the processes, not just in terms of program delivery, but also creating a culture of cross accountability where they can come forth and also question our processes and also contribute to our processes.
When the national lockdown happened in March 2020, we all have witnessed the number of migrant workers who walked down to their respective villages, walking hundreds and thousands of kilometers in this under the hot sun. And that is the time we realized what are the problems, difficulties, and even magnitude of the migrant workers.
Children are from marginalized castes, where we work with children. We're really talking about, street children. Where did they go when the world went into lockdown? What happened to them? Will they ever be able to come out of those socioeconomic shocks that their families endured? It's a point of reflection. And I also see it as an opportunity to do better by people.
While we say that pandemic was a great leveler and it affected everyone, but it disproportionately affected those who were on the margins, because as I said, there is very little reserve, and the pandemic kind of pushed a lot of people into destitution, slowly recovering from the shock.
This is the weakest section in the society. A prisoner is an individual who already belongs to a historically marginalized community. Then he or she gets, caged in today's civilization. So they're completely rendered voiceless. Like caging animals, right? Nowadays we speak about keeping animals in sanctuaries, but we are okay with caging humans. That itself is very, very disturbing. It speaks about the inherent violence in our society, where you're constantly othering people from marginalized communities. I mean, so this has to go. So the only way this change can happen is when people support say, leaders or, working in this area, trying to bring in change?
Giving can be a lot kinder, especially post-pandemic. There are a lot of question marks. We don't know what we're dealing with. It's going to unravel itself to us slowly as the years and the months go by. So I think somewhere I feel there's opportunity to go easy, on the change makers, to create flexibility in the frameworks around which we want to bring change, to give entrepreneurs, non-profits, the space to really experiment and to integrate across different sectors, to also create space for community voices to be heard, to really be given a space to speak for themselves.
The giving, particularly the private giving, shall not be on providing material, but providing support for capacity building of people. Capacity building of people, because people's capacity building is paramount. If we build an empowering community, then they will take care of themselves.
So I think for giving to be more inclusive, you have to work with grassroots organization. I think work with them sustainably for long term, because any of these changes, as I said, these are historical exclusion of centuries, and therefore a short-term, inflexible, specific funding is not going to help. Long-term, flexible support to grassroots organizations who often find it difficult to both serve the societies and continue to raise funds of small and very tight nature. So helping them with systems that help them sustain, make their operations more efficient, and can focus their energies on providing services to such communities, which itself is a tall order, right? But on the top of that, if you have to also manage your operation, focuses on smaller organizations, those who are working on the ground, working with the excluded communities, and help them in a long-term, sustainable manner. That's what is really required.
Also to prioritize lived experiences of people beyond just how productive they are able to be, or what is the kind of merit and capacity that they bring to the table. For us, it is very important to use rights-based language. So we veered away from, say, using the language of beneficiary, because we understand that we're just as much a beneficiary in the process, but to actually use the language of stakeholder, which implies a degree of investment and a degree of accountability towards all parties involved.
Inclusion is empowerment. Inclusion gives space for nation building.
Inclusion is open prison.
Inclusion is to serve communities on the margins, to serve with dignity and with their full participation.
Making and vacating space for people and communities and sections of the population that it's most convenient to leave out and say it starts with me, my community, my surroundings, my home, my neighborhood. What can I do to create space for people around me? And how through small actions, step by step, we build out something that becomes larger and bigger and political over time, that creates space for a much more egalitarian and equitable society.
What is important is that we continue to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And we also continue to hold a high degree of self-reflexivity towards ourselves and towards our peers, so that inclusivity as a process is actually practiced.